Oh, there we go. There we go, eh?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Okay, so here we go. Well, my name is Joel, and I'm a missionary with YWAM, Youth with a Mission, and I'm really excited to be here on you guys' campus, sharing with all of you guys.
Sorry, I forgot to ask you this. What audience are you talking to?
College, university,
Okay.
like a chapel or
I'm
something.
So sorry.
That's okay. There's thousands of people here. So, it's okay.
Okay.
I'm nervous, but I'm excited for all of you guys. What you're gonna, we're all gonna learn some awesome things. Now, how many of you guys know someone who's going through a really, really hard time? Yeah. How many of you guys? Maybe you even yourself. Maybe you're going through a really hard time right now. I know there's a lot of people here, so I can imagine there's probably a few of you who are just really wrestling with things. And I know, like when I was in college, there were always ups and downs and all around. And sometimes I was wrestling with like finances and what's going on with that, or what's going on with my relationships, or girls, or maybe finding the one, or maybe just wrestling with God, who is He? And usually when I get to these different times in my life where I am really struggling and really having a difficult time, I start asking questions, really difficult questions, like God, where are you? And why is this happening to me? And I remember one specific time I was seeking after God as much as I could, trying to do everything I could, the best I could, and I took a nosedive. And when that happened, we had a chapel service. It was all worship, and we were singing the song. You probably know this song, Oh no, you never let go, through the calm and through the storm. They were singing this song, and I could not sing it. And the question that was going through my mind was just God, do you really never let go? I want to tell you a story about someone who lost everything. It was just one disaster after another disaster after another disaster. She got to this point of really having a difficult time just with God, with life, not sure about going on. I wish she could be here to tell you the story, but she lived about 3,000 years ago, so that's not possible. But her story was actually written down and recorded, and I think we can learn a lot about it. My hope is to encourage you guys who maybe know someone who's going through a hard time, how you can be there for them. And for those of you who are going through this, to really know, how do you wrestle with these questions, and is it okay to even ask these questions, and is there really hope in this? So yeah, the person I want to talk about is Naomi, and she's written about in the book of Ruth. The beginning of her story, she wasn't really handed a very good deck of cards, as some might say. It says, in the beginning of her story, that in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine. Okay, so what does that mean? The days when the judges ruled. Well, it's been described as a very depressing and dark and disunited time in Israel's history. So imagine you're growing up with your family and your town is in a time of depression and darkness and disunity. How would that feel? What would that be like? And this is kind of what's going on. Why is that? Well, the Israelites, they've been raised up by God from being slaves, believing, they're worthless, not really understanding their worth and who they are, and God raises them up. He gives them an identity and says, I love you, and I've chosen you, and I want to bless you. And they get to this promise that God gives them. They get there by His faithfulness and by His strength. And they get to this place, and there's all these other nations around, right? And they start to look at these other nations, and they start to get distracted by them. And what are they being distracted by? Well, these other nations, the way they're practicing, worshiping God, they're doing it in a different way. And they don't really believe in the Yahweh, the one God. And to give you some examples of kind of, what they're being distracted by was they worship these gods so that they would be blessed in different ways. One of the ways they would do that is they would have like really big sex parties, where they would perform these different acts, and they would do this not just with, this was with like family members and everything. It was really, really disgusting. And it would cause a lot of problems, like, STDs, different things like that. And basically they would do this in order to please this God, so that this God would then rain down, bring rain, and make the land fertile, So they're thinking about, oh yeah, like making the land fertile, like this is what we got to do to make them happy, right? Another thing they would do is they had these bronze hands. And they would make these bronze hands, and other people, and they would heat them up till they were red hot. And they would have a ceremony, and they have like chanting and things like that. And then the person would come with their own child, a newborn baby, and they would place them on these hands. And they would sacrifice their children. So these are some of the things that these other nations were doing. So why would Israel be distracted by that, from God? Well, when they're worshiping the gods, they can do whatever they want, as long as they're pleasing the gods, as long as they're doing those other things. So, because when they're following God, then they've got to do all this other stuff, They've got to, every 7 years, they've got to give up all the land that they've taken and give it to the rightful owner who had it at first, kind of like it's a year of jubilee, of giving back. They can't just amass a ton of wealth for themselves. Every 3 years they're giving up a lot of their grain to store it up so that widows and orphans and people who really are very poor can have food, and they're more limited, you could say, in the way that they live, because God has given them certain instructions on how to live. And so they kind of get distracted by these other things as generations go by, and they forget who God is, and they go to these other gods. So this is kind of what she grows up in. And then she gets married. She has 2 sons, and it says that there is a famine in the land. Now, how do we in the United States relate to a famine? Have you ever really had to worry about food, like what you're going to eat next? Maybe you have. Maybe you do know that. As far as worrying it goes, I sometimes worry, like, I can't wait another hour before I'm going to eat, and I was trying to think of how we can relate to this. And, I can imagine, let's just say you go to lunch today, and they say, we don't have enough food, so we're just going to give you a handful. Everyone gets 1 handful of food. Now, I remember when I was in college, I'd get my tray, and I'd get 2 plates, and I'd get like 5 glasses, and I'd have tons of different drinks, and I'd have all this food, and then after that, I would go and I'd get a bunch of cereal, and then I'd and there was a lot of food wasted, all the time, in the cafeteria, but man, it was awesome, always food, never really had to worry, all this different variety, and it was great. But imagine, you get 1 handful, right? Now say this goes on for 3 days. You're only getting 1 handful every meal. How would you feel emotionally? How would you feel physically? Let's say this goes on for a month. And then they're like, oh, we still don't, we have less, so we're only going to give you 1 meal a day with that handful. What would you do in that situation? Go to McDonald's, right? You get out, you go find some place where there is food because you are hungry and you need food, right? And she has 2 boys, and teenagers, we eat a lot of food. And so she leaves Bethlehem, she leaves the promised land, and she goes to a place called Moab. And these people do not worship God. They're doing these practices, they do human sacrifices, things like that. And she, in a sense, leaves the promises of God in that place, like God's provision, what God could do there, and she goes to this other place with her family. So she's got this poor deck of cards. She's in this famine. She's hungry. She's starving. She has to leave everyone and everything behind. This is a collectivistic culture, so everyone stays together. So it's a huge, huge deal. Like that town, that was a big deal for her to leave that town. Everyone in the town felt it and knew it. And now she's left all that behind. She's there hoping for betterness, hoping for a better life. And what happens? Her husband dies within 10 years. Her 2 sons get married, but then they both die. Now, losing a loved one is really, really difficult. But for her, it was even more than that. It's almost like, let's say you have a job, right? And you've been working this job for a while, your whole life, you've had whatever, and then all of a sudden, your job is done. Like, it's over. Like, they fire you, it's gone, and you know that for the rest of your life, you are never, ever, ever going to be able to find another job again. She is a woman in that time, in that culturally, a woman who had no man, no son or father or husband or relative to take care of her. She became very, very poor, and she'd be scraping by. That's why God would, say, you need to store up your grain for the widows, because they don't have anyone to take care of them. And she was also in Moab, so they probably don't do things like that. And so she decides to go back home. And her attitude is pretty sad, She's asking, God, you let go, And she gets home, and the whole town kind of freaks out. It's kind of like, whoa, Naomi's back! And she's got a Moabite woman with her, because one of her daughters-in-law stays with her, Ruth, one of the main big characters of the story. And she turns to them, and this is what she says to them. She says, do not call me Naomi. She's going to change her name. She says, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? She's like, God has destroyed my life. He is against me. He hasn't even just let go. God is against me. He's taken everything from me. And the word Naomi, the name Naomi means sweetness, and the name Mara means bitter. So she's a completely different person, and she thinks there is zero hope for her. It's a very, very dark time. She feels alone. In fact, she's so hopeless that even though Ruth is with her, Ruth is an incredible woman. The name Ruth means friend, and she really lives up to that name. The name, on her way there, Naomi was like pushing her away. She was pushing her other daughter away, and she was pushing Ruth away, and she was saying, just go back home, go back to your families in Moab, get another husband, take care of yourself, just let me just die. Let me just, God is against me, everything's against me, just leave me alone. And Ruth says to her, I'm going to go wherever you go, and I'm going to die where you die. If anything except death separates from you, may I be cursed, pretty much. She will not leave Naomi. And Naomi just kind of gives in. But even with that friend there, she was still completely hopeless. So does God ever let go? Well, there's a song called It Is Well With My Soul. And I want to tell you the story of that song. The song, it talks about when trials come, when sea billows roll, my soul is still held fast in God, and all my sins are forgiven, and everything is taken care of for me. And the author of it, he wrote this during the darkest moment of his life. He grew up in the States, and he was a businessman in Chicago, and all of a sudden, the Great Chicago Fire? It was a big fire, he lost everything in that fire. And he lost his only son in that fire. And he had 3 daughters, and he had his wife still. And they just didn't know what to do. And so they decided to go on a vacation to Europe. And so his wife and his daughters and him are planning this vacation. And in the last minute, he had some business that he had to take care of. So he goes, he decides to stay, and he says, go ahead. You guys go ahead. So they go ahead, they get on this boat, and they're going across. And as they're going across, another ship runs into them and breaks the ship apart. And his 3 daughters die. And his wife was rescued. She gets to Europe. And that time they just had these little telegraphs, and it was really expensive, so she just sent this short message to him. She's like, everything is lost. What do I do? And he writes a quick thing to her saying, I'm coming, I'm right on my way. And he gets on the next boat, and he's going across. And as he's going across, the captain, when they get to the place where the other ship broke and went down, where his daughters died, the captain turns to him and tells him this is where it happened. And he goes down into his room, and he writes this song, It Is Well With My Soul. I want to go right to the end. A few months go by, possibly it's during a harvest time, and Naomi's at the end, and things have changed dramatically. She's surrounded by these women, and they say to her, Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. May the Lord's name be renowned in Israel. They're praising God. Naomi has a smile on her face, and she has been redeemed. And they're saying, look at what God has done. Look at how big he is. Look at this. You were in the darkest moment of your life. You were alone. You had no hope at all. You were called bitter. You wanted to be called bitter everywhere you went. But look at what God did, regardless of the cards you were handed. And what if Naomi had stayed in Moab? What if she had said, forget going back to my people and going back to God. I'm just going to stay in Moab and I'm just going to die here. She would have just died there. But she went back to her people, right? And you guys, the friend or you yourself, maybe you're dealing, or they're dealing with finances and kind of wrestling, like, what am I going to do? Maybe there are people who are really hungry. Maybe you're getting foreclosure in your house. Maybe you experienced those things. You lost a job. You don't know if you're going to find another job. Maybe you just have relationship issues. You lost a really close friend of yours to some argument, or you lost a friend of yours to something else. Or maybe you lost someone who you thought maybe you'd marry someday, or maybe you're just wrestling with that. Maybe you're wrestling with God and trying to just seek him, but you don't know how, and you feel like you're just always messing up, and you just feel so alone and dark. I've been in these kinds of been brought into this kind of situation multiple times, and every single time God has shown me, just like Naomi, that his grace and his love are way bigger than all of those tough questions and all of the hopelessness every single time. The only reason I'm here right now is because of his grace and his love. There are a few times where I almost stayed in Moab, you could say, where I pushed him away and I wondered, But in coming to him, he redeems. He is a redeemer. That story I told at the beginning, where I was asking God, do you ever let go? Like, can I really sing this song? It took a few months actually for me to heal from that, and it happened It happened during this time when I was in a church service. I had a friend with me, and they started singing this song again, and I was just like, God, I was wrestling with it in my heart and in my mind. I was like, God, like, can you really do this? Can you really do this? Like, can you let go? Do you let go? Where were you? Like, where, And he just said to me, Joel, start singing. And I was like, I don't know if I can. And finally I just gave in. I was like, okay. And as I started singing those words, I felt his arms wrap around me. And just that assurance, like, Joel, I will never ever let you go. Even if you feel like I'm not here, I am always here. I always will be. I just had to give in to him, you could say, and to give up and just trust him. Now, for those of you who know someone who's going through a hard time, how can you be a Ruth to them? Regardless of how they're doing, regardless of how they're feeling, regardless of what's going on, whether they're like, just call me bitter, or whether they're like, get away from me, how can you really communicate? I'm always going to be here for you. Those words mean a lot, even if a person doesn't respond to it. Deep within them, that's what they need. God can show his love through you in that. And those of you going through those hard times, those questions, don't be afraid of those questions. There are times my faith is so weak, I need someone else to have faith for me sometimes in my life, where I'm like, where is God? What's going on? That's okay. I wish my faith was stronger and I could just be like, yeah, I can do this. God is, but the ultimate truth is we are weak no matter what. We have to be willing to accept ourselves within those weak moments and come to God and say, this is me, and just be vulnerable with him and real with him. And just believe and know that God can do immeasurably more than we can possibly ever imagine, regardless of how low we get, regardless of how dark it is, or depressing it is, or he can do incredible things. So